Okay. The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. This video is about this novel. There's a film adaptation, quite nice. I think a few years after the publication of the book, I myself watched the film first and then read the novel. I think that's the correct sequence. And the best way to experience the two things, two media. Okay, I want to begin with an interview that Ishiguro did about the novel. Very interesting, pleasant to listen to, interview with Ishiguro. And in a very early on in that interview, Ishiguro talks about two aspects, or maybe two core themes in the novel. The first one being this, what the interviewer brings up, fear of emotions, the avoidance and fear of getting into human feelings and emotions, and really not just emotions but intimacy. Avoidance of intimacy, the fear of intimacy, fear of what intimacy might evoke in us, what feelings that it might trigger, what else it can lead to, and so we might be afraid. So that's one theme, and that theme is most prominently in the. It is embodied by the main character of in the novel, Mr. Stevens, the butler. The second thing Ishiguro says that this novel is about has to do with the meaning of this figure of the butler, what it means to be a butler. And he says that most of us, the majority of people on the planet, the majority of us, we are like this butler because we participate in systems that are larger than us, organizations, companies, institutions. We work for people, we contribute, we labor, and our labor contributes to these larger wholes. We don't really have a say as to where those larger wholes are going, what the orientation of the big organization is, what organizational decisions, what decisions are made at the higher level, how the world is run, so to speak, what people who are making big decisions, what they are doing. We don't really influence that. Our influence is very limited, very similar to the butler. What was interesting to me was the more I thought about that interview, the more I thought about how interesting it is that Ishiguro sees those two things as separate themes, that he sees them as number one, fear of emotions or avoidance of emotions, feelings, intimacy, and on the other hand, our limited, this limited scope of our influence for most of us. It is possible to see the connection between those two domains, those themes, because it is, I think it is precisely because of the avoidance of emotions, avoidance of intimacy, avoidance of embracing that personal, intimate side of our lives, or a person's life, that we don't see the political and social and larger significance of those emotions. In the story of the butler, Mr. Stevens, the house that he was a part of, the mansion, the manor, the place that he was a part of did not recognize him as a person who was capable of intimacy, capable of intense emotions, capable of falling in love. Just that those parts of him were not recognized, and he participated willingly in that system that did not recognize him as capable of those things. And by not recognizing himself and by not being recognized, he participated very smoothly in that system. He did not disrupt that system, the place. He functioned very well by not having those emotions, by not being subject to those emotions. And if he were to go for those emotions, if he were to let himself feel them, he would disrupt the system. He would disrupt the larger organization. So emotions and feelings, that intimacy, human relationships, they have social and political significance. It is fair to say, and maybe you, somebody listening to me might say, that the political force of these personal emotions are not really revealed to us. In terms of their political meaning, we are blind to them. We just see them as very personal, very immediate, very small scale. But it is not the case that they are politically inconsequential. And I think that's, in terms of literary criticism, for me, that is most strongly associated with queer theory. That a way of relating to the world, to the environment, to other people, for a butler who is very rigid, very professional, very serious, a way of relating, a way of maybe flirting, a way of being romantic, seems queer for him relative to his role. It would be very queer for him to do that. I mean, in general, in a very broad sense of the word. In that situation, that would be queer. And to embrace that, it is not just to embrace a way of acting that is strange, but to introduce a way of life, a way of being for him, a way of relating that would be disruptive. And his world, his environment, his other power relationships that are more dominant over him and his life, they might push back against him if he were to pursue those romantic interests, if he were to have these interests. So it's the same thing that I said about the political, social, the larger consequences of this small scale emotions. We see the same pattern as that with the way he reads his romance novel. So there's a scene both in the film, and we read about that in the novel too, that Miss Kenton finds him in his private room, private study, or the place that he rests, reading these books, and she asks him, what kinds of books are these? What kind of book are you reading? And he is hesitant to reveal what book he's reading, but when we find what the kind of book he is reading, we find that it's a romance novel. And then he says he doesn't care about the larger meaning of the novel. What he cares about is that these books help him speak better, speak more fluently, more eloquently, that to use language better, to use language well, to fulfill his function as a butler. So the same way he is just seeing romance and feelings as just a minor, like a unprofessional disruption to his role, to his professionalism, when reading a romance, he ignores the larger meaning, consequence of the story itself. He focuses on the flowery language. So in general, that focus being on the small scale, same thing that Ishiguro himself is expressing. That small focus and that control that comes after seeing that having that small focus and controlling that is the reason why these domains remain separate. Emotions and intimacy remain separate from the domain of social and political. It's that separation is a consequence of this form of life. And I think Ishiguro himself may be prone to that. Definitely Mr. Stevens, the character of the story, is definitely embodying that. Some other observations that I've heard in my discussions with my friends at this local book club that we have. Somebody said something that I really liked. She pointed out to the fact that Mr. Stevens, when we meet him in the very beginning of the novel, he's going on a journey. And as he's seeing things, he's seeing the great beauty of his country. It is very important that he is seeing his country, that he's not taking a trip to France, that he's seeing his England, he's seeing his country. And finding that, really seeing that his home is not just that manor, that mansion that he is living and working at. That his home is bigger than that. His home, his England, is has all these natural sceneries, these scenic beauties, the great scenes, and he says like there's nowhere else in the world that has this beauty. And of course, that's, you can debate that objectively, but the reason why there's nowhere else for him with that kind of beauty is because it is his place. It is his home, the home that he has been kept away from. Not just kept away from, but he has kept himself away from that meaning of home. Other observations that I think relatively easier to make, but I think they are important. The fact that he doesn't have a child. I mean, you can also note that Lord Darlington himself also doesn't have a child, but he himself, I think for me, the fact that he doesn't have a child is very important. Not only that, but the person that he treats as a child is his father. So usually there is this in the guild, the gilded culture, the culture of guilds. It is the father who takes the son or the offspring, son or daughter. It is the parent who takes the child to work and mentors them and takes care of them and sees their development. The parent sees the development of the child in a caring way, in a protective way, and observing the growth of that child. He does that to his father. He takes his father under his wing, takes care of him, finds a role for him, makes him his under butler. And we can think about what that means. I think what that means is taking, again, the role, the organization, this cultural tradition, the cultural entity, his workplace, taking that more seriously than nature. Repression of sexuality is related to this too, related to this observation, the emphasis on good manners. I don't think it's a coincidence that sexuality is associated with bad manners, that you cannot avoid, if you are to be a sexual being, if you are to recognize your own sexuality, you cannot always be on your good manners. There is an element of transgression. This includes, of course, it includes consensual sexual relationships, in which case both people have to transgress together, transgress the norms of the script of the situation that they are initially participating in. There's an element of crossing the boundary and taking things, we take things to the next level, but actually that next level is an interruption to the previous level. You have to break through. So this good manners of the butler, and butler, I think, for me, butler is duty bound. It's very faithful to his duty, his role, in a rigid way. And good manners are really prioritized over a more holistic way of seeing yourself, seeing oneself. One interesting thing that I appreciated about the novel, in the movie, we see that the butler is really performing. The butler performs the role of the butler, and a good butler is one who continues to perform well, as if that role is his second nature. So even under pressure, that role is not abandoned. This is discussed in the novel. But in the novel, it is also discussed that Lord Darlington, the employer, the owner of the manor, he also pretends. The way he said, and he describes him walking into his study, and Lord Darlington is pretending to be reading the encyclopedia and pretending that the order that he's giving to the butler is a passing thought that just occurred to him. It's like, oh, before you go, I have something I want you to take care of. So that pretense is happening on both sides. These kinds of observations are really interesting in the novel. It's more detailed, more flourished. I want to say one last thing about the romantic aspect of the story, the love story, the unfulfilled love story, because especially towards the end, it really becomes about that. It becomes about two people who had an interest in each other. They had feelings. They had these every evening. The two characters being Miss Kenton and Mr. Stevens. They had these evenings sitting, drinking hot chocolate together, going through the tasks of the day. And when they had an argument, Stevens withheld, like punishing her, said we shouldn't have these hot chocolate sessions. It's an inconvenience, obviously, but he was being passive aggressive, and he was withdrawing his minimal engagement. Kind of, I think it seemed as if he knew that they had something there, that there was a very minimal form of intimacy and relationship that they had, that he was withdrawing from that. But I am reading this, the romance of the story, in a backwards way. I think, unlike what an ordinary normal, what I see to be the more superficial way of reading this story would give us, that superficial reading of the story would give us this view that over time, Mr. Stevens realized that he had this potential love story, he lost his chance, and now he realized that he could maybe go and pursue her, and it's too late. The way I read it is maybe inspired by Foucault, the Foucauldian idea that it is not the ideas that determine how we live, but it is how we live, the life practices, our form of life, that determine what ideas we construct, what ideas we come up with. So the idea of a love story, I think, comes to him because he's at the end. He says, okay, I had this lost love, this lost opportunity for a romance, because I have arrived at the end. Now that there is just the remains of the day, such little time left, this confusion or crisis, he's resolving his crisis by saying, oh, look, I can make this love story right now. I can put together the events of my life such that it seems as if I had this potential romance that I lost. So it's the life, it is where he is, that has given him this story, the idea of this story. And similar to Don Quixote, Don Quixote became Don Quixote, became a knight errant after reading those picaresque stories about knight errantry. So he read a lot of stories about knighthood, and eventually he became a knight. And Stevens was reading, we are given this hint that he is reading a lot of romance novels, pretending to read them for language, for the way they use language. But at the end, eventually, he breaks from just reading these romance novels and entering into a romantic life towards the end of his life. Maybe closer to the end of, maybe we don't know how close he is to the end of his life, but he's past the midpoint. So this is my reading of the love story. I mean, his life is ambiguous. In fact, there are many different ways of reading for him to make. There are many different ways of making sense of his life, but the way that he settles on reading his life is based on this romantic material that he accumulated, and based on the narrower scope that he has, fewer options. He settles on this very attractive way to suffer, to say that I have lost the love of my life. Maybe he should resist that temptation to suffer like that, to suffer/enjoy. Okay, let me know if you disagree with any of that. Not sure how disorganized or organized it was. Shout out to my local book club and all the people who join me in reading various books that we read together. It's really more enriching to read together and discuss together. And especially this Remains of the Day, I would not have read it if one of our friends had not suggested it for the group. And I ended up being more impressed by it than I was expecting, because after the two other books that I had read by Ishiguro, I was not planning to read anything else by him. I had read Never Let Me Go and then Klara and the Sun. And with both of those, I appreciated the ideas. I appreciated, okay, these are really good ideas. He definitely has good ideas before he sits down to write. He has great plans. And I also like the pace with which he shares the novel, shares the sequence of events and the sequence of revelations that we get, we find out with all the discoveries, and bit by bit the ideas unfold over time. But there's something in his style, there's something in his writing that just, to me, it's never joyful. It never feels like he just enjoys writing, enjoys using language and playing with words. And his observations are good, but maybe he's a little bit too I don't want to say intellectual, but I think intellectual is a good alternative. He's too much into his head. He's thinking too much. But the remains of the day, if I were to just select one out of those 3 books that I've read by him, is by far the better work. So much more concerned with the body, with affects, with the totality of being a person, being human. And very thought-provoking, of course. Okay, that's enough. I've talked enough. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.